Well, I hate to take us away from that beautiful music that Christina has chosen, but it's 6 o'clock and we're going to get started. First, I'd like to introduce you to Faith Justice. I'll do a little housekeeping here first. My name is Susan Wands. I'm here with the New York City chapter of the Historical Novel Society. I am your facilitator. And what I'll be doing is I'll be reading the chat field. If you look in the chat right now, you can see that I've pasted in the links to buy the books that we're mentioning here tonight. Rhapsody by Mitchell, James Kaplan, One Man's Music by Christina, Britton, Conroy, and our lovely host's book by Stephanie Cowell, Marrying Mozart. So we have an exciting giveaway. So if you post a question in the chat field for our authors, and then we select you, I will instant message you for your email address, and we will send you an ebook of the books that we're talking about tonight. So as questions come to you, you can go ahead and put them in the chat field, and I'll get them read back during the question and answer period in about 45 minutes at the end of Stephanie's question. But right now, I'd like to introduce you to Faith Justice, the president of our chapter, and she's going to talk about who we are and what we do. Take it away, Faith.
All right. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that.
Your mic, I think, is off.
No, I hear her.
I hear her.
Yeah. Am I just not very loud?
There you are. We got you now.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I'll lean in a little bit. Yes. Welcome, everybody, to our chapter meeting. This past year has been challenging, but also very rewarding as we moved from in-person meetings to online meetings. And we found that we can actually reach out and touch a lot more people by using the internet. So we will be continuing to do this for the foreseeable future. But we do have a very vibrant community, and I do encourage you to join us. We have a website, we have a Facebook page, we've got Instagram, we've got Twitter. So we can communicate with you in almost any way you wish to be communicated with. But I recommend that you do follow us on those various media and join us, and then you'll get firsthand notice of all of our wonderful programs. We also have a national conference coming up this June, which is going to be all virtual. And I highly recommend it. Look it up online. It's HNS-conference. And, I think I'm pretty sure they're still open, for people to join. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, but I want to introduce her first because Stephanie has a very interesting background and which made her particularly qualified to host this particular program. So Stephanie went to her first opera at the Met at age 12. The same year that she would stand around her friend's piano and sing from a book of old traditional English songs. After years of vocal studies, she became a high soprano, singing 30 roles in small opera companies. She also formed a classical vocal ensemble which toured many colleges, historical homes, and prisons. And she sang traditional songs with guitar in schools, clubs, and concert halls. After forming the chamber opera company Strawberry, she left singing to write novels. So with her music and her literary background, she's particularly well suited to host this. And I'm going to turn it over to her so that she can introduce our guests for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. Okay, I am Stephanie. I'm a native New Yorker and a music lover. And in the past year, I have grieved, as we all have, very much for the loss of live performance in my city. I walk past Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, and Broadway, and put my hands on the walls of the buildings and say, come back. And they will come back. But when I discovered 2 novels set about music in an older New York, I knew I wanted to do a Zoom about them for the New York Historical Novel Society. Because what you don't have in your life, you can always find in a novel. You can open the first page and quickly you are somewhere else. So I'm deeply connected to the worlds of James Mitchell Kaplan's Rhapsody and Christina Britton Conroy's One Man's Music. My mother adored George Gershwin and Kay Swift. And I remember being about 6 years old and standing tiptoe to carefully settle the heavy double-sided record on the record player and hear Todd Duncan sing I've Got Plenty of Nothing from Porgy and Bess. I was also entranced by Rhapsody in Blue. And then fast forward to the 1970s New York world of a struggling soprano in Christina's novel, and that was my own journey as a singer. So for this Zoom, we will temporarily leave this world where live music is trying hard to come back and fly on the wings of novels back to New York in the 20s and in the 70s. I must add, before beginning the questions, though, that these novels are not just about music, but also about complicated love. Kay Swift in Rhapsody is caught between her love for her husband and the brilliant George Gershwin. And Jenna, in One Man's Music, forms an obsessive attachment to a handsome and brilliant composer, which rules her life. Even when concert halls are closed, the struggle of love continues. So to begin the program, Mitchell, by the way, Mitchell is calling in from Ireland at this moment. Mitchell, can you talk for a few minutes about the story of your novel, Rhapsody?
Thank you, Stephanie. So Rhapsody opens in July 1937. Kay Swift is on top of the world, or feels that she is. She's the musical director for Radio City Music Hall's Rockettes, which is a big happening New York City institution at the time. And she's written a ballet for the famed choreographer George Balanchine. And as a composer of the hit musical, as the composer of the hit musical Fine and Dandy, Kay has broken a glass ceiling, triumphed where no woman succeeded before her in the rough and tumble world of Broadway showbiz. But as Stephanie suggested, her love life is a mess. After she married into a wealthy Jewish banking family, she felt increasingly frustrated as a classical musician and composer until she discovered jazz and met George Gershwin, and her world turned upside down. So Rhapsody tells the story of this love triangle during the roaring 20s and the 30s in New York City, which is, as you know, a tumultuous time in American history, marked by the Great Depression, rampant anti-Semitism, as I mentioned, glass ceilings, both for female and Black musicians, and the rise of Hitler. And much of that comes into play in the story.
Thank you. I'd like to, Mitchell told me that he had to pack so quickly for Dublin that he forgot to bring his book. So I'd like to show you the cover of his book. Unfortunately, I can't show you the cover of Christina. She'll show it to you because I have hers on Kindle, which is why I couldn't find it the other day when I was looking for it. Kindle. Okay. Christina, can you tell us something of One Man's Music?
Oh, absolutely. Now, of course, Mitchell's story is true. All that really happened. My story is not true. It's a story I made up. It's loosely autobiographical, which is why it's kind of weird right now that it's considered historical, because it's over 50 years old. But as Stephanie mentioned, it's a story of New York City musicians, normal working musicians, not stars, struggling musicians during the 1960s and 70s. The protagonist, the beginning of the story, she's 10 years old. She's an affluent kid. She's bright, she's beautiful, she loves to sing, and her very self-centered social climbing parents are in the middle of a horrible divorce. Her home life is hell. She blames herself for the dysfunction. And so when she discovers this lush, gorgeous music that actually takes her soul away, she buries herself in it and starts talking to an 8x10 photograph of the very handsome composer, projecting onto him the perfect father and best friend that she ever had. And eventually, as Steffi said, she grows up and she meets the real guy. And indeed, he's gorgeous and brilliant, but he's not a nice guy. But she's still in love with him. Go figure.
Okay, so can you, where are we now? Okay, can you tell me how you were compelled to write your particular stories? The story comes from one's life and longings and settles on us and says, tell me, that energy is what gives it life. So Mitchell and then Christina, what made you choose this story, or what made this story choose you?
Stephanie, you mentioned that when you were a little girl, you used to carry those heavy discs and place them on the platter, put the
Yeah.
needle there, and Rhapsody in Blue came over. And I think that that illusion that you made to memory calling us and influencing us, a voice from the past, was unconsciously at play.
Mhm.
What happened in terms of concrete events is, I've told this story before. I had just finished my previous novel, Into the Unbounded Night, and I was sitting downstairs in the dining room, and I had 300 CDs in the shuffle, in the CD carousel set to shuffle, and I was sipping my coffee, and Rhapsody in Blue came on, and I pictured my father, who used to play the clarinet. He had died a couple of years before this breakfast event that I'm describing. And I pictured him standing in front of a hi-fi, playing that opening clarinet slide at the beginning of Rhapsody in Blue. And then it's followed by that little kind of klezmer ornament. And I started crying. And I knew right then and there, I knew that that was going to be the starting point for my next novel. I didn't know about Kay Swift. I didn't know about Jimmy Warburg. I didn't know that much about the 20s and the 30s. But for me, and we'll talk more about this probably, for me, writing a novel is a process of discovery. And that's what makes it so exciting for me.
Oh, that's really beautiful. That's so much what I have felt. So Christina, what can you tell us why you were compelled to write this particular novel?
Right, certainly can. And it's so different because Mitchell's is such a beautiful, kind of happy, bittersweet story. Mine was awful. Mine I wrote totally out of frustration and pain and anger. Ever since I was a little tiny kid, I wanted to be a classical singer. And at 15, I was studying at Juilliard Creek College. For the next 10 years, I studied, worked a lot of places. By the time I was 26, I was in Europe singing opera, but I knew I was not going to be a star. I was not going to be an opera star. So I came back to New York. I worked in musical theater and did pretty well. But it was not singing great music. It was never doing the stuff that I loved. The spring of 1979, I was finishing 15 weeks at Radio City Music Hall. That was 4 shows a day, 6 or 7 days a week, singing crap. Hello. But I was all ready to go and do this wonderful summer stock season where I was going to be singing the leads in classical operettas in the Maine woods for 10 weeks for almost no money, but it was going to be wonderful. But right then an audition came up for a Broadway tour. The show was on the 20th Century. The star was Rock Hudson. I got the tour. It was 6 months. It was more money than God, as far as I was concerned. It was prestigious. But I was back in the chorus. I was understudying a lead, but she was very healthy. So I only went on twice in 6 months. Anyway, we opened in Detroit, and I immediately made friends with the pit players who were all Detroit Symphony men and women and wonderful musicians playing dot, 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 you know, in order to get the rent paid. And I was on stage singing dot, 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 dot. And it was just so frustrating that I was sitting backstage and just scribbled a story that eventually became the novel One Man's Music.
That is fascinating. I am so fascinated by how everybody, where the novels come from, because it's complex, you know, what happened and what you wish happened, and it's an amazing story. So in both of your books, I was fascinated by the period, the 1920s and the 1970s, and how they give color to the story. Can you read us a few minutes, a minute, whatever, of something which shows the character and the period of your novels, Mitchell?
Yes, I picked the following passage that gives, I think, a little taste of what it was like to be young on a date in the 20s. So Kay, her name is Catherine Swift at that point in her life. She's dating Jimmy Warburg, who takes her to an underground dance hall, which I describe as a basement bursting with cheap liquor, socially stratifying brawls, and furtive dalliances. The last place where Catherine would have expected a Warburg, a Harvard man, to unwind. Boy, have we got a treat for you, announced the band leader, who looked so juvenile, Catherine wondered how he had slipped past the bouncer. He introduced a colored lady in a hat and long flowing dress just up from Atlanta named Bess Smith. And she's going to yodel a toe tapper by a fella calls himself Irving Berlin. He pronounced the name Oyvind Boylan. I think you know the guy. Everyone cheered. The band started playing. Hands and feet flailed. And then the band leader stopped them, waving his arms. No, 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 he told them. That ain't what we're doing here tonight. We ain't here to dance. That we can do any night. We're here to crazy dance. The band resumed playing more up-tempo, and this unprepossessing Southern woman belted out a song called I've Gotta Have Some Lovin' Now. The beat was as asymmetrical as the rhyme, and the music as lively. Giddy with the scent of booze and Jimmy's Rhineland cologne and the wild primitiveness of the music, Catherine waved away all sense of propriety and decided to make a fool of herself, flinging her arms and feet like a drunken frog, crazy dancing, the recent discovery of a culture in flux. Perhaps not Catherine's culture or Jimmy's either, but that made it all the more exhilarating. How do you know this place? She shouted to Jimmy after Bessie Smith finished, while everyone was clapping, stomping their feet and whistling. Navy flyers know how to whoop it up, he shouted back. I'll say, but she wondered what he meant, what kind of dissolute life he was leading at the Naval Reserve Air Pilots Training Camp in Delaware. When a man wobbly with giddiness and booze bumbled into her, she fell into Jimmy's arms. They looked into each other's eyes and broke out laughing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh my gosh. That's totally great. Christina, can you give us a scene that you feel does your character and your color of the period?
I can indeed, because actually this is exactly what I lived. I mean, exactly. The people are real and all this. When I got back to New York in 1977, I was lucky to get an apartment in the Britton Hall Hotel, which is on 86th and Broadway. Right now it's very she, but at the time it was an absolute dump. And the real estate people figured out that they could do better money-wise if they just rented cheaply to artists who didn't care. They were just grateful they had some place for cheap rather than fixing it up for normal people to live in. So every musician in New York City in the 1960s and 70s knew that building. I mean, they either lived there or they had slept with someone there or they had a rehearsal there or whatever. So here in this scene, Jenna, the girl, she's bringing her new boyfriend, Josh, the manager, to her apartment for the first time. So we started up the outside stairs and crash, bam! An explosion of sounds erupted from a drum machine and overblown speakers. Josh blinked hard, listened for a moment and shouted, "Is that supposed to be music?" I looked over the metal banister and waved to my stoned neighbor standing on the sidewalk below me, playing an original pop rock song on his battered synthesizer. A box in front of him held a few coins and dollar bills. His rented room without a bath cost next to nothing, but I was amazed his street music earned enough to pay even that. I yelled to Josh, "You told me you knew this building." He smiled and nodded as I pushed open the cracked glass doors, led the way over the threadbare carpet and through the huge, shabby apartment hotel lobby. Harsh lights glared from naked bulbs and broken chandeliers. I spread across the patchy floor and made a beeline for the hotel desk with its World War II vintage switchboard. Bobby, the sweet old guy behind the counter, had greasy hair and dirty fingernails. He smiled and pulled mail from my letter slot. A huge woman in a worn house dress and an antique headset sat next to him, answering a buzz from the switchboard. She pulled a thick black wire from the bottom of the board and plugged it into a hole at eye level. A large yellow dog slept at her feet. I took my mail and smiled. Thanks. Night, Bobby. Night, Colleen. They nodded back. Josh and I joined a dozen other people waiting in front of two freight-sized elevators. One came to a bumpy landing and I yanked Josh out of the way. Like a breaking dam, the wide double doors opened and a rock band cascaded out. Josh tried not to laugh as half a dozen half-stoned kids in aesthetically torn jeans and black leather dragged out a truckload of electronic instruments and sound equipment. Everyone waiting to go up fit comfortably inside with room to spare. The elevator made 3 stops before reaching the 9th floor. I led Josh down 2 wide corridors past row of apartment doors. We heard Bach from a piano and Ravel from a bassoon and a tuneless screech from a saxophone serenading us to the end of the hall. I took out my keys, unlocked my double door bolts, pushed open the door and switched on the light. Josh followed. I doubled back, closing and bolting the door. All sound stopped. No matter how much noise there was in the halls, the thick apartment walls and double paneled wooden doors made the interiors virtually soundproof.
Oh my gosh, that really brings me back to my singing days. You know, when you live in these horrible circumstances, but it doesn't matter because you are going to be that great star one day and you're just heading for that. And it doesn't matter that your couch is falling to pieces. It's really, it's my life. Anyway, so Christina and Mitchell, your novels are both now considered historical, even though it's a little scary to consider that something in the 1970s is now historical. But the novels differ, I believe, in that all major characters in Mitchell's actually lived and are pretty well documented, whereas Christina's major characters are fictional, though we never know how fictional characters come to us. What is the difference between the 2 types of writing? What problems or freedoms do each one have? Can we start with Christina for that one?
Sure. No, I love reading historical novels about real people. But for whatever reason, well, I like making up new stories. So the idea of recreating a story where I already know the ending, that just doesn't turn me on. So I always have historical characters who wander through my fictional characters, but they wander through and then move out quickly.
And what about Mitchell? What do you feel about this?
Well, obviously, I mean, I feel that there's a mixture of, I even hate to say reality and imagination because it all feels real to me. What I do is I dive into the research and I just read everything I can about the period. And I obviously, like other historical novelists, I surround myself with everything I can that's going to be evocative of the time and place and the people, go to museums, etc., visit places. But at a certain point, I've absorbed enough of it that I just feel it's coming alive inside of me. I know you know what I'm talking about, Stephanie.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure.
I did. I
yeah.
checked in the wrong century.
So at that point, what happens is I feel like what emerges in my mind and on the page and then kind of becomes clarified through successive drafts is something that approaches what I think of as the ideal form of history. You know, the real form of history is like the dirty, rough, messy history that people experience in so-called real life. But when you're writing a historical novel, you're kind of distilling it to its essence. And so again, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a straight answer here, but you're talking about the reality of the characters and the imagination. I guess what I'm saying is
Yes, a
they fuse
combination.
there's a feeling that they meld into one thing that is
Yeah,
substantial and convincing.
Right. And I
yeah,
would say certainly if I'm writing, when I'm writing about a period that I didn't live, I also love researching and finding, myself in the period, and then making people who could have lived in the period.
yeah. It's endlessly fascinating to me. So this is a question that all you historical novelists out there, I'm sure there's several of you, will have asked this question themselves. So I'm a historical novelist, okay, and I'm extremely irked when someone criticizes my characters when they don't behave as in the real versions of themselves. If they had gin on a Tuesday in real life, some readers go crazy if you have them drinking gin on a Thursday. To me, our genre is called historical fiction and must follow a drama line or plot first, and people's lives don't necessarily come with plots. What are your feelings about this level of judgment that we have to move things around and you feel okay with it? And what, either one of you?
Okay. Well, I actually did with One Man's Music. I had to change years because, for instance, I had the building of Lincoln Center and the refurbishing of Philharmonic Hall. If some of you were around at the time, when they first opened it, the acoustics were disaster and they had to totally tear it down and rebuild it, whatever. And I had the wrong year. So I had to like change it and go back and make sure it was the right year. So that kind of thing, I'm absolutely pristinely careful about. But
But I mean, I think to me, I mean, I feel very strongly that the drama of a piece comes first, and then if you want to find out the exact, I always say some things are changed slightly in time for dramatic intent. And if you'd like to find out exactly this, you can this book, and this book. I'm indebted to these historians.
Right.
But people can really get on your case. Amazon reviews or something get on your case. No, her color hair wasn't that color red. It was
right.
Anyway. Mitchell, do you have anything?
I have Leonard Bernstein being angry with his musicians, which he was a lot, and undoubtedly the exact words I put in his mouth are not the words that he echoed. Even though I remember as a little kid being there and listening to him yell at people, but so.
Oh, what an experience!
Well, so yeah, that must have made an impression. So I'd like to just kind of harp a little bit more on what I said earlier, that
sure.
to me, history is the rough draft of the historical novel. And what I mean when I say that is our minds can't easily assimilate all the information, everything that happened to all the characters over a given period of time. And what we long for as human beings is story. We long for dramatic arcs, characters who grow, stories that begin with a problem, reach a climax, and resolve to some kind of satisfying conclusion or transform the characters. And I feel that is like a container that we need in order to contain the essence of a series of events. And I don't know why humans have the need for this particular form, which we call, let's say, roughly, dramatic form or something. But we do need that. And to me, it's a great mystery of the human psyche. So what the good historical novel does for me is it makes history comprehensible. And if you tell me that in the process it distorts history, I would say it's the other way around. A good historical novel, let's just say the ideal historical novel, smooths over and corrects the noise that makes the so-called real history so difficult to grapple with. So if you tell me, she drank a gin on Thursday and not on Tuesday, well, no. In the ideal form of history, which is the historical novel, she drank that gin on Thursday. You're correcting history.
But it's thank you. That's wonderful. I mean, it's kind of amazing when you think back the need for story, and you think back to Homer, which people think that Homer lived probably about 800 BC, and he was a guy with a harp, probably went around with his harp, went from place to place telling a story, revising that story a little bit until it finally began to be written down, probably about 600 BC, something like that. The need for story, I think, is really to make things cohesive, to know that our lives are not just random as they feel sometimes, but they too are a story. And I think being held in a story gives you a feeling that it is all cohesive. There is a reason, not just I got up in the morning and then the cat knocked over the milk and the doorbell rang and whatever your particular life is, but that there is a we're going towards someplace. And I never kind of thought of that before. So anyway,
and that's why we have mythology.
Yes, mythology. Yes.
That's why we have mythology. That's why we have. I mean, I would go so far as to say that's why we have the Bible. But
yeah. It's true. Before the Bible I'm always fascinated in trying to find out when the different books of the Bible were written down, because they were story. At one point, they were just verbal history, as Homer was verbal story before someone had the papyrus and the pen to write this down in some version or another. So it fascinates me. So anyway, how do you describe
Stephanie?
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, well, sorry. Am I being rude? I was going to say.
I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No. I cut you off. But anyway, so well, now I forgot what I was going to say. But it has to do with the form of it that I feel that we don't really understand history without doing this to it. And that's the big mystery to me. And it's a way of making it comprehensible. So to say that, this detail or that detail is inaccurate is to totally miss the point.
Yes. I agree.
All. Okay, I'll stop interrupting you.
That's very important. I'm sorry, it's considering that Mitchell and I are, 3,500 miles apart. It's amazing in Zoom that we managed to get as many cues from people. If you're looking at the wrong screen, you don't get the cue from the screen you're not looking at. It's not like somebody in 2 feet away from you. And when we were normally doing this and we're sitting at this table and Mitchell would say, and I think
there's also a little delay occasionally.
A little delay. We're doing the best we can. Zoom is sometimes creep, not Zoom, but okay, so how do you describe music? You both do it so beautifully. You are musicians, but how do you describe sound? Can you read something of your musical description? Christina, maybe first?
Sure. Okay. Well, this is the first time that Jenna, as a little kid, hears Eric's music. Again, we were talking about long playing records, so that's where she is here. Again, just to remind you, her parents are in the middle of a horrible divorce. No one is explaining anything to her. Her life is scary and awful at this point. So she says, I tore the cellophane off the record jacket. The new black plastic disc looked like buffed ebony, and the smell made my nose tickle. I carried the thin disc around the bed to my hi-fi, started back, heard the first notes, and stopped in my tracks. Low stringed instruments played a series of slow, soothing chords that seemed to wind around my waist. Like soft tentacles, the music hugged me, tugged at my heart, and held me absolutely still. A solo violin took over, sliding through the other instruments, soaring higher and higher in a sweet, poignant theme. Moments later, a mellow French horn countered the violin melody. I couldn't move. I never wanted to move again. I felt nurtured, calm, and absolutely safe.
That's beautiful. I remember reading that
Beautiful.
passage.
Just beautiful. Mitchell, do you want to read something?
Yeah, something that will contrast with that because I don't want to compete with it. So this is Kay Swift, Catherine at that point. She is having one of those roaring 20s parties, and George Gershwin has entered. And so she's kind of meeting him face to face, although she's previously seen him perform. She's meeting him face to face for this first time. And he is more interested in the piano than in the people. And he goes and starts playing at the piano. So this is, I describe him playing, and then this is where I'm going to pick up. Catherine had no idea how long Gershwin had been playing when he paused to sip his seltzer, oblivious to the enchanted crowd, but he could not ignore them long, for they broke into applause. He turned to Catherine, a gleam in his eyes. Say, I hear you've got a wicked left hand yourself. Both of my hands are wicked, Mr. Gershwin, said Catherine. Why don't you serenade us with something you picked up at the Institute? He rose, clutching his highball glass and seating the bench. What did you tell him about me? Catherine whispered to Pauline. That's Pauline Heifetz, who brought Gershwin to the party. Only that you're blessed with two of the finest ears in the city and fingers to match. Catherine grimaced and headed to the piano, where she played the portion of the Rhapsody in Blue that she had worked out, the slow portion. After several bars, Gershwin lowered his half-empty glass to a side table and crouched behind her, extending his arms on either side of hers. His scent teased her nose, cigars and an eau de toilette mélange of citrus, sandalwood, and bergamot. He began embellishing, and soon their melodies intertwined. Catherine glanced up at Jimmy, her husband, who stood near the end of the piano watching and smiling in his ambiguous way. Gershwin added notes in other implied time signatures, triplets against eighth notes and exotic keys, and bumped up the rhythm so that Catherine soon felt she was his accompanist rather than the other way around. Nor was she adept at this style of accompaniment, which involved reading the other player's mind rather than notes on a printed page. Flexibility and instinct rather than calculation and precision. Together they waded further beyond her waters. She tried to swim but flailed. It may not have been noticeable to the others, but Gershwin knew. She felt uncomfortably warm, a flush she did not care to name or recognize. She worried others might notice, but glancing around the room, she saw no sign that they did. As her eyes returned to the keyboard, her fingers stumbled. That was mortifying.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Beautiful. So, as I and other readers are always curious about process, can you tell me how long your novels took to write, and very briefly, what was the process of getting them into print, which is always an adventure?
Okay, I guess it's my turn.
All right, sorry. You know, of course you can't see my cues. I'm far away from you on a screen. Okay, sorry. Christina?
Okay, well, mine took, it was funny. It was kind of interesting writing this out. 30 years. As I said, in 1979, I was on tour with that show and jotted down the original idea of a story. I had never written anything. I'm dyslexic, slightly, enough so I can't spell. And in school, I loved to make up stories, but I was always crucified for anything I put down on paper because it was so bad. So I never tried to write anything. So anyway, that story, you know, I scribbled down the idea of a story. So that was around 1979. Somewhere around 1981, I still had the story in my head, so I turned it into a song cycle. I wrote 9 songs that told the story. Then I was studying screenwriting somewhere around 2000, so I turned it into a screenplay. And screenplay did pretty well, actually, but was never produced. Anyway, a couple years later, maybe 2002, I turned it into a full-length novel in the third person. I had a literary agent by this point who loved it, couldn't sell it. After a few years, maybe 2005, she says, well, rewrite it, try rewriting it in the first person. Yeah, why not? I mean, I've already written it 15 times, sure. So I rewrote it in the first person. She still couldn't sell it. I found another literary agent who finally did find a publisher for it. 2009, it was finally published, 30 years.
I relate. And Mitchell, I was kind of there when you made the initial, I guess, sales pitch for your book. So I was a bit like an auntie. Wasn't it at the Historical Novel Society? I think. Yes,
When I
no.
first did what?
Made your initial pitch for it. This novel was that Historical Novel.
You're
Society,
right. You're right.
We
You're
were
right,
drinking
and I-
wine, and you put your wine glass down and said, "I've got to go and make my pitch." Left me there very nervously,
Yes.
you know.
What happened is, I had this idea, and by the point that when we had that Historical Novel Society convention, I knew about Kay Swift, and I kind of had a sense of how I was going to write the book. And I had a meeting with an editor, and I pitched it, and she said, "I love it. I want it." I'm sure I told you that, Stephanie. She said,
Yes,
"Well, give
you
me
came
50
down, and I
Yeah.
still had my glass of wine, and you were glowing. Yeah, you came down to the restaurant.
She said, "Give me, 50 pages and an outline, but I love that. I love the concept." And she knew about my previous book, and it had had a certain kind of success, and it seemed like everything was a go. But I ended up actually selling it to a different editor, because the first editor just didn't read it in time. I got her the pages. She took a few weeks. And then I found myself in conversation with this other editor, and I just had a good feeling about the way the conversation was going. We were actually talking about a different book. But anyway, she asked me what else I had, and I told her about this one, and she was intrigued and asked me to send the pages along. So at that point, I told the first editor that actually, I was just gonna move on. And because I had written to her, she hadn't gotten back to me, and I just felt like, she was so enthusiastic, what's going on here? So I just wanted to move on because the second editor was so interested. And then it ended up, we ended up signing a contract, and I had a year to write it, and I spent a further year after writing the first draft, improving it. That's how this book was written, but that's not, I can't say that represents anything other than, a momentary hiccup of the universe, because I don't think these things are predictable, at least in my life. I think as Christina said, you can spend 30 years on a book, you can spend 2 years on a book, and there's no real saying why, whether one book is going to be better than the other. I don't even know
There
how
is no way
Yeah.
to say
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I mean, I spent more than 30 years on one book, and I have done another book in 9 months. And I really wanted to program myself to do, okay, you did one in 9 months and you sold it, and that's what you're going to do. But I didn't have any say over the process. Each one came through me like children are different. We're almost running out of time, so I'll ask you a couple more questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. Okay, so can you tell me, what was one of your best memories of the journey of your novels so far? A review, a Zoom, a call, Christina? Any responses?
Okay. Well, actually, this was the second novel I wrote, but the first one to get published. And I do remember that one of my very favorite moments, having told you about being dyslexic and all this, and people say, why did you wait till you were 40 to start writing novels? And I said, because when I was 40, somebody invented spell check. Literally, literally. Anyway, I remember when I finished my first book, which became my historical novel series, which was published second. But my darling husband, who'd been helping me all the time, I remember when I finally finished the thing, I walked out and I said to him, I wrote a book.
It's amazing. It's amazing to say, actually, writing a book is, I'm sure a lot of people here are writing books. And when you think of all the people who say, I want to write a book, and then to actually say, I've written a book, it's a big piece of work, growing from one sentence to a lot of pages. Mitchell, do you have a favorite moment of your central publication or before or for this novel?
I mean, I don't know about you or other writers, but I suspect you all have the same feeling that I do, which is you you love your book, you love it. It's something very close to your heart, but you have no idea how the world is going to treat it. You have no idea. And
No
it
idea.
so when it goes out there, and I have to say, I thank God for this, and I knock on wood, and I don't want to, I don't want to boast about it because that would be bad karma. But I've had the unbelievably gratifying experience that each of my 3 novels has been greeted with enthusiasm and glowing reviews. And wow, that sounds awfully boastful, but really I say that in humility because I'm grateful for it. I'm so grateful to the bloggers and the reviewers and the readers who have made the effort and reached me halfway, or found the space that we share in this story, which I think it's a miracle. And that's what I can say. That is the happiest moment of any book, is when people get it. And it keeps happening. It keeps happening. And it's just it's really a reason to live. There are other reasons to live also,
Yeah.
but that's one of them.
Of course, it's one of the reasons to go through all the craziness,
Yeah.
is to have the miracle. It's something most people outside writers make up in their heads, a little story that tells us that never gets anywhere, except maybe they'll tell their husband or the wife or something like that, or their best friend. And we write a dream, we write a vivid dream, and that dream can be read by someone in Hong Kong. It can be read by someone in San Francisco that you never knew. And sometimes you'll get an email or a letter out of the blue, you don't know me, and it is just so amazing to think that your novel can have touched somebody that you've never met.
And Stephanie, we've discussed this before, but I feel, I don't think, I don't take ownership of that dream, and I don't think you do either.
No.
It's something that is given to us, and we get it, we mold it as well as we can to resemble what it's supposed to be. But then someone else meets us there. All these other minds inhabit that space. And that is just so amazing that we share this space with other
It is amazing.
souls.
It's quite wonderful. When I did my first novel, I remember I used to ask people who said they loved it. It was Nicholas Cook. It was about a boy in Elizabethan times who was an actor. And people would tell me they loved it. And I said, can you tell me what you love most about the book? And sometimes people would tell me very private things. And then one very old Episcopalian nun said to me, oranges. I said, oranges, sister? Thinking of my whole big book. And she said, yes, they ate oranges. They got oranges, from Spain, and they got to eat one. And I used to get oranges when I was a child at Christmas time. And I said to myself, oranges. But, so you never know what. Another man saw his whole breakdown of his marriage in my book. But so you never know if it's going to be oranges or the breakdown of a marriage or what that people will find that's individual in your book. And it's a great honor to me when anybody chooses to spend their time, reading my book. Well, the time is it's time for questions. Also, can I ask you a script of the last one, the number 13? No, not number 13. Is there anything else you'd like to say, either one of you, before we open?
I need to show the picture of my cover because you didn't have
it.
it.
Yes, please do.
That's
I have that somewhere on my shelves and I can't find it.
Well, I have you on my shelves too, so that's okay.
But it's terrible. I'm now going through all my books, and literally I'm sneezing from all the dust in the room. It's just, I thought I dusted them, but
There,
there's a lot of
If
books.
any of you out there haven't read
Jerry,
Stephanie's Marrying Mozart, I was her fan before I became her friend because of that book. So
That book was a time of joy. That was my nine-month book. My husband had been very ill, and we didn't know if he'd make it, and he recovered. And I was writing a sad book, and I changed. I said I want to write a happy book, and so I wrote this book, Marrying Mozart. So Mitchell, is there anything that you'd like to add before we open it up to questions? You're such a good soul. It's about 1:45
I just
in the
want to,
morning there, isn't it? Yeah.
oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was yawning before we started. Now I won't be able to sleep. But no, I don't really have much to add. Your questions have been wonderful, and I've probably spoken too much already. So,
Never.
but I want to point out that Jerry James here in the audience held up Christina's book while you were talking about the cover.
oh, thank you.
Oh, good. It's just terribly frustrating because I have like 14 large bookshelves, and I'm determined now to find out what's on them so I can sort of greet my friends' books again. And I know hers is there, and I just can't find it. It's frustrating. So anyway, so if we are done with our regular part of the program, like questions and stuff, do we have any questions from
We have quite a bit of questions.
audience?
We have quite a few
Okay.
questions. The first
Okay.
one, we know that Christina spent almost 30 years getting ready for her novel. The first question from Mary for you, Mitchell, is how much time did you spend researching Kay Swift and George Gershwin?
You know, I generally find that I am researching my next novel while I'm finishing a novel. So I was finishing my novel Into the Unbounded Night. And I started, I had that kind of epiphany. I guess previously, earlier in this conversation, I said that I had already finished that book, but I think I was still working on it. I had finished a draft or 2 drafts or 6 drafts, whatever, but I was still tidying it up. And I started just kind of compulsively reading books about Gershwin, about the period, and you just get sucked in. And I think I spent about a year reading before I even wrote a word, and just reading books and reading and listening to music and doing other kinds of research. Yeah, I'd say in this case it was about a year prior to writing the book. And then I continued researching as I went along.
But you had music in your life. I mean, you had Gershwin and that sort of music in your life most of your life, didn't you?
I always have a question. I always have a question that motivates a whole lot of research. Like for Into the Unbounded Night, my question was, how did it happen that Christianity and Judaism diverged in the first century and became so different and even antithetical, really? By the end of whatever, let's say the 3rd century or something, it seemed antithetical. And as far as this book goes, Rhapsody, that one of the questions that I had was what makes Gershwin's music so great? That was, because I remembered it and it had this effect on me. I remembered it from my childhood, from my father's, even though it's really of my father's parents' generation. But for him, it was nostalgia. And then I was experiencing this nostalgia twice removed. And I just had this question that informed my musical exploration.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about the characters. Not that the music and the characters are so inhabit separate realms either. But that question really bothered me. What did Gershwin do? What did he do? And of course, I came up with all kinds of ideas about what he did, both musically and in terms of what you might call ethnomusicologically, because I think he was like the first practitioner of world music. He was bringing in music from various cultures and mixing, including high European classical music, but also blues, ragtime, klezmer, and then eventually started bringing in, what we would call Latin beats and so forth.
Mhm.
So, I mean, so these are some of the answers. And then things like, seventh chords and flat sixth and things like that to get a little technical. But so I forget how I got onto that. But anyway, I don't know if that answered your question.
But that's great. Thank you, Mitchell. And Christina, I have a two-part question here for you from Dave. The first part of his question is, could you tell us roughly what percentage of your novel is autobiographical? And then why did you decide to do this as a novel and not a memoir?
Okay, well, the first part, what part of it is probably 70% of the novel is autobiographical. I grew up in that apartment that the kid grew up in. I had a dysfunctional family, but nothing like hers. I made hers much more entertaining than mine was. But I lived in all those places. I mean, all those experiences were my experiences and Stephanie's and every young singer, musician at the time. What was the second half? Sorry, Susie.
Oh, no worries. The second half is, why did you decide to do it as a novel and not a memoir of your real experience?
That's a good question, because since it was all those years ago, probably because it was much safer making it someone else's story.
Yeah.
It would have been just too painful writing it as my story. Also, I could make it more interesting. I mean, I have always been actually I have to give a shout out here to William Shukoff, who's down here. You were one of my first conductors, Billy. We were school friends back in Toronto 100 years ago. But I have always been a woman who loved the alpha male. Brilliant composers, conductors, choreographers. People say, who was Eric Ries, this character, the composer? And I say he is a compilation of 50 powerful, brilliant men I worked with, did more than work with, over the years. Anyway, turned him into like the best of that I would have had, that I never had all those traits in one guy. But certainly at that time in my life, I was a totally neurotic mess at whatever I was, 27. And there's no way I could have told that story in a memoir. I wouldn't have been able to do it. So making it someone else's story using my life was safe and very therapeutic.
Now, here's a question for both Mitchell and Christina from David. He would like to discuss with you if you could describe your writing process and methodology. Are there certain times and places of the day that work for you to write? And how many hours do you spend per day or per week writing?
Mitchell?
I was going to say Christina.
Mine's very easy.
Well, there's no. Oh yeah, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, mine's very easy because I have no.
Mine's very hard.
Whatsoever. I mean, Mitchell is he's a real author. I mean, he's the real thing. I just do it for love. And since I just do it for love, I do it when I feel like it. If I'm involved in a story, I will sit down 16 hours a day with this story. I mean, my first novel, which turned out eventually to be a historical novel series of 4 books, but the initial story was 600 pages that I wrote in 4 months while I was working a full-time job. So I was just this is my His Majesty's Theatre, my turn of the last century British theatre series. So if I'm compelled in this, and thank God during COVID, I was working on another novel like this. So so when people were saying, oh, aren't you bored with her? No, I love being at home. I'm making up this story. So I have no discipline whatsoever. If I'm not interested, I don't write. If I'm interested, I'm usually obsessed and writing all the time. I know Stephanie's very disciplined, and I imagine Mitchell much more than I am.
I probably do about maybe 20 to 30 hours a week, depending where I am. I can get possessed and work for 8 hours. Normally I work for about 3 hours in a day. It's just, but it's when I first get up in the morning, that's it. My characters talk to me and And Mitchell, do you want to say
Yes.
something about that? Yeah.
Well, ditto, I guess is what I want to say. I mean, I get up very early normally. Now, tomorrow morning, I won't be getting up early because it's like, whatever time it is. It's super late here in Ireland. Well, it's only 11:59. Anyway,
Oh,
yeah,
midnight.
because yeah. So I get up very early normally. I try to go to bed early if I can, but even if I don't go to bed early, I get up, I wake up, and I just can't wait. You know, it's like my mind is bursting with ideas, with things I have to write down. My characters have kind of talked to me overnight. And so yes, I work while everybody else is sleeping. When I say very early, you know, it can be 3 o'clock, 2:30, 4 o'clock, it depends. But I love to work while everyone else is sleeping, before anyone else is awake. That's early morning is when my mind is just, you know, buzzing, and and I can do all of my actual writing, all of my creating, um, before, let's say, 10 a.m. or so. Then if I am going to be working further that day on a novel, it's going to be revision. But then there will be periods where, you know, there will be periods where I have to put the thing aside, and I'm not going to be working on it at all for a period of time until I know what I've got to fix, what's bothering me, what's not quite right. So there are days where I'm working intensively, and there are days where I'm feeling like I wish I could be working intensively, but I don't yet know exactly what I'm supposed to do. So I wish I could give you an answer like this, some method or something other than madness, but I'm afraid I can't.
But here's another interesting question for both you writers of historical fiction. When you're writing about someone as famous as Gershwin, and Christina, you mentioned was it Bernstein?
Leonard Bernstein, yeah.
Do you worry about their estate or their relatives coming after you, how you depict them?
I do. Big time.
Oh boy. I don't think I want to even open my mouth on that one. Thanks anyway.
And
No,
here's
actually, I had with my historical novel series, I had a lot of help from the Henry Irving Society in Britain, and I have Henry Irving moving in and out of my novel, but I had him in apparently historically correct, but in some cases not necessarily flattering stuff, and I took it out actually when I started working heavily with the Irving Society, because it wasn't needed for my plot and I didn't want to offend anybody.
Several people have asked, first you, Mitchell, when you're writing, do you listen to music? And did you listen to a lot of Gershwin music when you were writing Rhapsody?
Not just Gershwin. And please, I want to establish clearly that the book is not just about Gershwin. It's from Kay Swift's point of view. She was a great musical mind in her own right. And her background was in classical music. And so I talk a lot about the music that she loved and why she loved it and how it affected her and what it meant for her. And she has a nostalgic relationship with some of the music that connects her with her father, much as, although I wasn't thinking of this consciously, now I realize it's very parallel to the way the Gershwin was connecting me with my father when I started to write this book. But of course, yes, definitely. Music is a lot of what this book is about. Music is a great mystery. It's a powerful form of communication. And I had to immerse myself in the music of the period, including the music of Gershwin, with great joy and abandon. You could almost say writing the book was a pretext to spend a lot of time listening to music.
And Christina, here's a question. Someone wanted to know, did you put any pieces of music in your book that you actually sang?
Oh yeah, a lot. And I've had readers like whoever, I guess, Stephanie, talking about people who you don't know writing to me, because I had people writing to me afterwards saying they had actually looked up the pieces of music that I mentioned. So yeah, there's a lot of real music mentioned besides the made up music. But I'll tell you, some of his compositions are like so real to me. I mean, I hear them. And talking about writing to music, I not only write to music, but I have a huge selection of CDs that are basically are listed in mood. A lot of it's film music. Film composers are my gods because they are the best people in the world of making us feel things. I'm a certified music therapist in my other career, and that whole business is emotion and music. And so if I'm sitting down and I know I have to do a sad scene, I will grab from the CD list of music that makes me feel sad. Or if it's an adventure scene, like that. When I'm
Wow.
editing, never. I need to edit in absolute silence. But for the initial creating of story, I always listen to music.
Leslie would like to know that because you're talking about famous people, Christina, you mentioned talking to the Henry Irving Society, but did you have to approach the estates of any other famous people before putting real people in your novels, or do you just write them and then deal with it later?
Well, I use real people very seldom. So no, I didn't. Somebody was mentioning the other day, oh, my friend Steve Peters there, I'll give him a shout out. Because he's famous now for being interviewed by Tammy Faye Baker, and his person is being somebody is playing him in a movie, meeting Tammy Faye Baker, and he was asking if he could get some royalties or something. They said no, because now you're a historical character. So it's kind of interesting. But Mitchell, what about you?
Well, again, this is a very touchy subject right now for me. And I think I'd better not comment on it.
That's
Really.
no worries. We understand you have your hands full. We do have a question here. Someone would like to know, what are both of yours next projects?
Who wants to go first?
Go ahead.
Yeah, which one?
Or
Mitchell?
Stephanie, maybe. Okay, well, all right. So you're all going to be among the very, very first people to hear about this. But basically, the novel I'm working on right now is set in the present and in 1967. And it's a man who lost his brother during what I would call the dark side of the summer of love, the 60s, but not necessarily a kind of a prettified 60s, a time of revolution and dysfunction and idealism and hope and confusion. He lost his brother, and years later, today, he's still haunted by the memory of his brother, and he meets a woman. She's from India. He meets her on a plane, and she plays the veena, which is like the sitar, but it's Southern Indian instrument. And her son, she's actually ill, and she's going to die. And they become very close. And her son, he becomes convinced that her son is the reincarnation of his brother that he lost. And she wants him to adopt her son. So that's a kind of a very rough pitch of what I'm working on right now.
Wow.
That sounds fascinating.
Way deeper than mine.
And also the idea of, I want to mention also that, the Hinduism comes into play with reincarnation and the Indian music and so forth. So that's kind of a lot of the ambiance of the story. Okay, sorry.
Cool. I can't wait to see the movie with the music. Okay, mine are way less interesting. But well, during COVID, I've started writing television pilots for my historical novel series, because I would love to see that on the screen. But I have also been working on a novel that I've been working on off and on for years, which is about the dark side of beauty pageants, children's beauty pageants, and talent competitions. And I used to work backstage at those for years. And the stories are, they're kind of quite horrific stories that need to be told.
And Stephanie, what are you working on now?
Well, you're the first, Mitchell knows this, but today I had my beloved Edwardian novel accepted.
Oh, boy.
But I think this is the perfect house for it. They told both editors love it, and I'm extremely happy. So there we have it for me. About two and a half years from
It's
now,
a-
it'll be out. So
That's great.
It's a beautiful, beautiful novel.
book. It's a beautiful.
thank you. Oh, I see something from Margaret. Thank you, Margaret.
Well, that's a perfect way to end this presentation with a success story by our host. So that's fantastic. Faith, did you want to sign off before we say goodbye at the end of this?
Yes, I want to thank our distinguished panel, Mitchell and Christina, for joining us this evening. I know these things take a lot of time and effort to get ready for, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your literary contributions with us. And also Stephanie, because again, I am very much aware of how much work goes into preparing to be the host of these things. And I appreciate all the time and effort you put into it. A couple shout out for behind the scenes people, and one person not so behind the scenes, who's Susan, who's our tech guru. And I want to thank Susan Wands for putting this on again. And if any of you out there are interested in learning Zoom and would like to help us with our tech in the future, we're open, because we don't want to wear poor Susan out doing this month after month. And Lisa Yard, who's our communications guru, who did all the work behind the scenes with the emails and all kinds of neat new things that she's put into place since she's come back to us. So again, thank you all for your contributions. And we hope that people who watch this come back and watch another program.
Well, thank you, everybody. Good evening and have a nice
Thank you, Susan.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Stephanie.
Susan, thank you, Christina. Get some sleep, Mitchell.
Thank you, Christina.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with
Bye-bye,
that one.
everyone.